The alarm on my wrist cuts through the silence first. Then the shuttle jolts so hard my teeth click together. Outside the window, 3 alien warships fall into formation around us, close enough that I can see the pulse of their engines lighting up the dark like slow heartbeats. "They are not firing," says the pilot, a young woman named Priya Nair, her voice tight. "They are escorting us. That is what they are calling it." I grip the armrest and force my breathing to slow. My name is Elias Voss, and 3 days ago I was folding laundry in my quarters on the orbital station above Earth. Now I am being escorted, at gunpoint in every way but the paperwork, toward a tribunal that has existed longer than my species has known how to write. Escorted, I repeat. Let us call it what it is. We are being marched. Priya does not answer. She does not need to. The ring station ahead of us grows larger by the second, a structure so vast it swallows the stars behind it, built by hands that were shaping galaxies while humans were still learning to strike flint for fire. They call themselves the Concord. 9 founding species, thousands of client worlds, and a set of laws so old that most of the beings who live under them do not remember a time before they existed. The Great Laws, they call them. Sacred, untouchable, perfect. 3 weeks ago, humanity broke 3 of them without even knowing they existed. Command wants a status update, Priya says. What do I tell them? Tell them I am still breathing, I say, for now. The shuttle shudders as it passes through the ring station's outer field, and gravity shifts under my feet like the floor itself is deciding whether to hold me up. I do not look away from the window. I refuse to look away. Whatever is waiting for me in there, I will not walk in with my eyes down. I think about the message that started all of this. It arrived 11 days ago, translated into every human language simultaneously, broadcast to every receiver on Earth and every ship in the fleet. No greeting, no context, just 4 lines. Humanity has violated Concord Law 7, Concord Law 12, and Concord Law 31. A representative will be summoned. Compliance is required. Refusal is not an option that exists. I remember standing in the command center when it came through, watching grown officers go pale, watching the Prime Minister's aide drop a cup of coffee and not even notice it shatter. Nobody in that room had ever heard of Concord Law 7, or 12, or 31. We had broken rules we did not know existed, set by beings we had never met, and now we were being told that refusal was not a choice on the table. I was the one who stood up in that silence. Not because I was the bravest person in the room. I was simply the one closest to the door, and the one who said, before anyone else could, that somebody had to go and ask them what, exactly, we had done wrong. That is how a communications officer with no diplomatic training ended up strapped into a shuttle, watching an ancient alien station swallow the sky. The shuttle docks with a groan of metal meeting metal, and the doors do not open right away. We sit in silence for almost a full minute, and I use every second of it to remind myself why I volunteered. Because somebody was going to represent humanity in that room, and I did not want it to be someone who would apologize before they even understood the accusation. The doors hiss open. A corridor stretches before me, tall enough to fit 3 of me standing on each other's shoulders, lit by a soft white light that seems to come from the walls themselves rather than any visible source. Waiting at the end of it are 2 figures. Neither of them is human. One is tall and thin, with skin like polished stone and eyes that seem to hold too many colors at once. The other is shorter, broader, covered in fine scales that shift color as it moves, the way a mood ring changes with warmth. Elias Voss, the tall one says. My name in its mouth sounds stretched, like taffy pulled too thin. You will follow. I generally do follow instructions, I say, stepping out of the shuttle onto a floor that hums faintly beneath my boots. When they make sense. The scaled one tilts its head, and for a moment, I think I see something flicker across its face that might be surprise, or might be amusement. It is hard to tell with a species I have never studied. This way, the tall one says again, ignoring my comment entirely. I follow. What else can I do? Behind me, the shuttle doors seal shut, and Priya's voice comes through my earpiece one last time before the signal dies. "Good luck, Commander." I do not answer. I am too busy counting the guards. There are 12 of them lining the corridor, evenly spaced, each one a different species, each one armed with something I do not recognize, and would rather not test. I count out of habit, not fear. It is what I have always done, since I was a boy watching thunderstorms roll in over the hills near my home, counting the seconds between lightning and thunder to guess how close the danger really was. 12 guards, one long corridor, no windows, no obvious exits besides the one I came through. I am not afraid of the number. I am afraid of what it means that they thought they needed 12. The corridor opens into an antechamber, and here I finally see other beings who are not guards. They stand in small clusters, murmuring in languages that mean nothing to me, and every single one of them turns to look as I enter. Their eyes are curious, wary, some outright hostile. I feel like a specimen being observed before it is allowed into a larger enclosure. A voice speaks from everywhere and nowhere at once, calm and layered, as if 100 throats formed it at the same time. The tribunal will see the human envoy now. The tall alien beside me turns, and for the first time since I arrived, actually looks at me directly. "Whatever you say in that room," it tells me, "cannot be unsaid. Choose carefully." "I intend to," I say. Massive doors ahead of us begin to part, sliding into the walls with a sound like a held breath finally released. Light spills out, and with it, the low murmur of 1,000 voices falling silent all at once, as they notice me standing at the threshold. I straighten my spine. I think of every person on Earth who does not know my name, who is going about their day not realizing that whatever happens in the next hour might decide the shape of their future. I think of the hills near my home, and the thunderstorms, and how I always counted the seconds instead of running for cover. I step through the doors. The chamber beyond is enormous, circular, rising in tiers like an amphitheater built for giants. Every tier is filled with representatives of species I have never seen, some tall as trees, some small as children, some with more eyes than I can count. All of them turn toward the small platform at the center of the room where I am clearly expected to stand. At the highest tier, raised above all the others, sits a single figure wrapped in robes that seem to shift and ripple like water, though there is no wind in this chamber. When it speaks, the layered voice from before resolves into a single tone, ancient and heavy, like stone grinding against stone. "Human," the figure says, and the word carries through the chamber without any visible effort. "You stand accused of defiance." I walk to the center of the platform, feeling 1,000 eyes track every step. I do not rush. I do not hesitate either. I stop, look up at the figure they call the Elder Speaker, and I let the silence stretch just long enough for everyone in that room to understand that I am not afraid to let it stretch. "Then let us begin," I say. "Tell me exactly what it is you think we have done." The Elder Speaker's robes ripple once, slowly, like something ancient shifting its weight. "You will not need to be told," it says. "You will be shown." And somewhere above me, the vast ceiling of the chamber begins to change, light folding into images, and I realize with a cold drop in my stomach that whatever comes next was never meant to be a conversation. It was always meant to be a verdict. The ceiling above me dissolves into moving light, and I am looking at my own planet from orbit, rendered in perfect, terrible detail. I recognize the coastline near my childhood home before the image shifts again, pulling closer, showing footage that should not exist outside of classified archives. "Concord Law 7, the Elder Speaker says, and the words settle over the chamber like a judgment already passed. No species below the 4th threshold of development may pursue weapons capable of altering the fundamental structure of space itself. The image shows a research vessel, one I recognize instantly because I helped clear its personnel for departure 18 months ago. It was testing a drive system meant to fold distance, nothing more, a desperate attempt to reach the nearest colony world faster in case of emergency. I did not know, none of us knew, that the physics involved brushed against something the Concord had decided, long before humanity existed, belonged only to them. That was never intended as a weapon, I say, and my voice sounds smaller in this vast room than I want it to. Intention is irrelevant, the elder speaker replies. The law does not ask why, it asks what. The image shifts again. Now I see human colony ships, dozens of them, spreading out from Earth toward systems we had surveyed and found empty, worlds with no signs of life, no claims, nothing but rock and ice and possibility. Concord Law 12, the layered voice continues. No species may expand beyond its home system without submitting each destination for review and approval. Approval from whom? I ask, and I do not bother to soften the edge in my voice this time. Those systems were unclaimed, empty. We surveyed them ourselves, for years, before a single ship launched. Empty does not mean unclaimed, the elder speaker says. The Concord claims all systems within its charted boundary, until such time as review grants otherwise. I feel something tighten in my chest, not fear exactly, closer to the feeling of watching a door quietly lock from the outside while you are still standing in the room. The final image appears, and this one I know without needing the law read aloud. It shows a laboratory on the outskirts of a research colony, where scientists worked for a decade to correct a genetic condition that had caused thousands of children to be born with organs that failed before their 20th birthday. I remember the headlines when they finally succeeded. I remember my sister crying with relief because her son had been one of the children given a second chance. Concord Law 31, the elder speaker intones. No species may alter its own biological structure beyond the parameters set at first contact, without submission and approval. You are telling me, I say slowly, that curing children was against your rules. The law does not concern itself with outcomes, the voice answers, only with permission. Something in me goes very still and very quiet, the way the air goes still right before a storm breaks. I look around the chamber at the tiers of alien faces, some watching me with open hostility, some with what might be pity, and a small handful, tucked into the lower tiers, watching with an expression I recognize because I have worn it myself. It is the look of someone who has been told no so many times that they have stopped expecting anything else. Let me understand the shape of this, I say, and I make sure my voice carries to every level of that chamber. A species reaches for safety, and you call it a weapon. A species reaches for room to grow, and you call it theft. A species reaches to save its own children, and you call it defiance. Is there anything left that we are permitted to reach for at all? You are permitted to comply, the elder speaker says, as every species before you has learned to. I think, in that moment, of every story I was ever told growing up about the shape of my own species. Not the myths, the actual history. I think of doctors who broke quarantine rules to carry medicine into villages that had been abandoned by their own governments. I think of engineers who ignored outdated safety codes and built bridges that still stand a century later. I think of the asteroid that was tracked toward Earth 2 generations before I was born, how every simulation said it could not be stopped in time, and how a handful of stubborn scientists broke every rule of caution written into their mission plans and diverted it anyway, with hours to spare. I think of my sister's son, alive today because a team of scientists decided that a rule they had never heard of mattered less than a heartbeat they could save. You keep speaking of these laws as though they protect something, I say. Tell me honestly, in this entire history you are so proud of, has a single one of your great laws ever been written by a species while it was still afraid, while it was still burying its dead and counting its losses and wondering if it would survive the week? The chamber goes quiet in a different way now, a tense, uncertain quiet, and I notice the elder speaker does not answer right away. The great laws, it finally says, were written in wisdom after the founding species had already secured their survival. That is my point exactly, I say. You wrote your rules after the danger had already passed. We are still in it. Every single law you have read to me today was broken by people trying to protect something they loved, not by people trying to take something that was not theirs. A murmur rises through the tiers, and I cannot tell if it is outrage or something closer to attention. I press forward anyway, because I have started something now that I cannot leave half-finished. You call it defiance when we act to survive, I say. I would like someone in this chamber to explain to me what you would call it if your own species had been in our place. If your children were dying and a cure existed, but the correct authority had not yet given approval. If a rock the size of a mountain was falling toward your homeworld and the only ship capable of stopping it broke a rule about permitted flight paths. Nobody answers. The elder speaker's robes ripple once, slower this time, and I realize I have never seen it hesitate before this moment. The law exists to prevent chaos, it finally says. Without it, every species would justify any action in the name of survival. Then perhaps, I say, the problem is not that we broke your laws. Perhaps the problem is that your laws were never built to survive contact with a species that still remembers what it feels like to be afraid. I look up, past the elder speaker, at the vast tiers of species stretching around me, ancient and comfortable and untested for longer than human civilization has existed. You have been asking the wrong species to kneel, I say. The silence that follows is different from every silence before it. It is not the silence of judgment being prepared. It is the silence of a room realizing all at once that the thing standing in the center of it has no intention of shrinking. The elder speaker leans forward, robes settling like water, finally finding stillness. Explain yourself, human, it says, and for the first time, the layered voice sounds almost curious instead of certain. What is it you believe should replace the rules you call wrong? I take a breath, and I feel something shift inside my chest, the same feeling I remember from standing up in that command center 11 days ago, the feeling of being the person closest to the door when everyone else has gone quiet. Give me the floor, I say, and I will show you. The elder speaker studies me for a long moment, and the entire chamber seems to hold its breath along with it. Then the layered voice speaks a single word. Proceed. I turn slowly, taking in the full circle of tiers around me, thousands of eyes belonging to species whose names I do not yet know, all waiting to hear what a species barely out of its own cradle believes it has the right to say. You asked what should replace your laws, I begin. I am not here to erase them. I am here to tell you that a law written by the untested cannot govern the ones still being tested, so I offer you something different, not an exception carved out for humanity, a new foundation built from what we have actually learned, rather than what was assumed before we ever left our own atmosphere. A being near the third tier, tall and armored in what looks like living metal, lets out a sound that might be a laugh, sharp and dismissive. A foundation, it repeats, its voice carrying easily across the chamber. Built by a species that has known the stars for less than a single lifetime of my own kind. You wish to write law before you have finished writing your own history. I do not flinch. I look directly at the speaker, and I let a small, steady breath fill the silence before I answer. Every law that has ever mattered, I say, was written by someone too young, too small, or too stubborn to accept the world as it was handed to them. Your own ancestors did not inherit the great laws from beings older than themselves. They wrote them, first, when they too were untested. Someone in this chamber's past stood exactly where I am standing now, and was called too young as well. The armored being's mouth, if that is what it is, presses into a thin line, and it does not answer. I press on before the silence can turn against me. Here is our first proposal, I say. The right to defend what is yours, not the right to strike first, not the right to conquer, but the right to stand and protect your home, your people, your children, without waiting for permission from beings who have never once stood in danger of losing any of it. A law that punishes a species for defending itself is not protecting peace. It is protecting whoever already holds the most power. Somewhere in the lower tiers, I notice movement, small and cautious, beings leaning forward instead of away. I cannot yet tell if it is interest or disbelief, but it is not indifference, and that alone tells me something. Our second proposal, I continue. The right to grow, not without care, not without consideration for what already exists in the space around us, but the right to reach toward unclaimed room without first begging an ancient council for a signature. Growth born from need should never require permission born from fear. The elder speaker's robes shift again, slower this time, and I cannot read whether the movement is agreement or warning. Our third proposal, I say, and my voice steadies further with every word, because I am no longer speaking as someone accused. I am speaking as someone building something, responsibility instead of restriction. Give a species the tools to correct its own suffering, and trust it to bear the weight of that choice, rather than binding its hands until suffering becomes permanent, simply because no authority arrived in time to approve the cure. A different voice speaks now, smaller, quieter than the armored beings, coming from somewhere near the lowest tier where I noticed those tired, listening eyes earlier. It belongs to a slender figure with pale, near-translucent skin, and when it rises slightly from its seat, the chamber's attention shifts toward it as well. Elder speaker, the figure says, voice trembling only slightly. If I may. The elder speaker inclines its head, granting permission with the smallest gesture. My people, the figure continues, lost an entire generation to a sickness the Concord decided we were not yet permitted to correct. We were told to wait for review. We waited 11 years. By the time approval came, the sickness had already taken what it wanted. It pauses, and something in its voice hardens. I have sat in this chamber for a very long time, listening to laws be recited as though they were carved by something greater than the fear of losing control. I would like to hear more of what this human is proposing. I feel something steady in my chest at those words. Not triumph, something closer to recognition. I am not the only one in this chamber who has learned what it costs to wait for permission that never comes in time. The armored being turns toward the speaker with open irritation. You would trade the order of 1,000 generations, it says, for the promises of a species that has not yet survived its own infancy. I would trade nothing, the pale figure replies evenly. I am only asking to listen. There is a difference, even if your people have forgotten it. The chamber murmurs again, louder this time, voices rising and overlapping in languages I cannot follow, but I recognize the shape of the sound. It is the sound of a room dividing, some pulling toward the old certainty, others leaning toward something unproven but honest. I decide this is the moment to finish what I started. You call us untested, I say, turning back toward the armored being and letting my voice carry to every level of the chamber at once. You are right. We are untested. We have not had 1,000 generations to grow comfortable. Every single year of our history has cost us something. We have buried more of our own than most of you can imagine, and we kept building anyway. We have been wrong more times than I could count in a single lifetime, and we corrected ourselves anyway, without waiting for a council to tell us it was permitted. I let that sit in the air for a moment before continuing. You built your great laws from a place of safety, long after your survival was secured. We are asking to build ours from the opposite direction, from the place we are actually standing, still uncertain, still learning, still willing to be wrong and correct course, rather than wait for perfect permission that may never arrive. That is not recklessness. That is the only kind of honesty a young species has to offer. The elder speaker is silent for a long moment, its ancient eyes studying me with an intensity that makes the whole chamber feel smaller. You ask this council to abandon the wisdom of 1,000 generations, it finally says, for the instincts of one that has barely survived its own beginning. I ask this council, I answer, to remember that it too was once a species with barely survived its own beginning, and to consider whether the laws it wrote back then would have made sense to the beings sitting comfortably here today. Silence again, but different from before. Not the silence of judgment, and not quite the silence of agreement either. It is the silence of a room that has, for the first time in longer than I can imagine, been asked a question it does not have a ready answer for. The elder speaker rises fully from its seat, for the first time since I entered the chamber, robes settling around it, like the closing of a long-held breath. "This tribunal will consider what has been spoken," it says. "But know this, human. Words alone will not undo 3 broken laws. The fleet already moving toward your system will not be recalled by a proposal alone." My stomach drops even as my expression stays steady. "Then we understand each other," I say. "Because words alone will not make us kneel either." The elder speaker's gaze holds mine for a long, heavy moment, and somewhere behind those ancient eyes, I see the flicker of something that might be respect, or might simply be the recognition of a threat it did not expect to meet in this chamber today. "Then let us see," it says quietly, "which of us is willing to prove it." The message reaches Earth before I do. By the time my shuttle clears the ring station's outer field, the Concorde fleet is already 3 days from our system, and every screen on the planet is showing the same countdown. I am strapped back into my seat, Priya guiding us home at a speed that makes the hull groan, when the first transmission from Earth Command reaches me. "Commander Voss," says a voice I recognize immediately, steady despite everything, belonging to Fleet Director Owen Vance. "Tell me you have good news." "I have honest news," I say, which is not the same thing. I explain everything: the laws, the tribunal, the proposal, the fleet already moving toward us like a verdict already decided before the trial finished. Owen listens without interrupting, and when I finish, there is a long pause before he speaks again. "So they are giving us a choice," he says slowly. "Kneel or be corrected." "That is the shape of it," I say. "And what does correction look like?" I think of the images the elder speaker showed me, the weight in its voice when it spoke of laws that did not concern themselves with outcomes, only permission. I think of the pale figure who spoke on my behalf, who told me quietly before I left the chamber that her name was Naira Thess, and that her people had learned exactly what correction looked like, 11 years too late to save a generation. "I do not think we want to find out," I say. Owen is silent for a moment. When he speaks again, his voice has changed, not louder, but heavier, carrying the weight of a decision already forming. "Then we do not wait to find out," he says. "Get back here, Elias. We have work to do." By the time I land, Earth's defense grid is already alive in a way I have never seen it before. Every shipyard, from the equator to the poles, is running at full capacity. Engineers who were designing colony transports 2 weeks ago are now reworking hull plating and shield arrays. Civilian volunteers are lining up outside recruitment stations not because anyone forced them, but because word has spread of what waits above us, and something in the character of my species refuses to let that news sit unanswered. I stand in the command center, the same room I stood in 11 days ago when this all began, and I watch a wall of screens tracking the Concorde fleet's approach. 3 capital ships, a dozen smaller escorts, moving toward us with the calm, unhurried confidence of something that has never once needed to consider losing. "They are not rushing," says a young tactical officer named Callum Bryce, watching the same screens I am. "They do not think they need to." "Then let us give them a reason to reconsider," I say. Over the next 2 days, I barely sleep. None of us do. Earth's shipyards produce what should take months in a matter of hours, not because the impossible suddenly became possible, but because every engineer in every yard has decided that sleep is a luxury that can wait. I watch a woman named Grace Iwu lead a team that rebuilds an entire shield generator using parts scavenged from 3 different ship classes never designed to work together, and somehow, against every rule of proper engineering, it holds. "It should not work," she tells me, wiping grease from her hands, when I ask how she managed it. "Does it work?" I ask. "It works," she says. "Then it does not matter what it should do," I say. "Only what it does." On the 3rd day, the Concorde fleet enters our system, and every screen in the command center goes quiet as we watch 3 ancient capital ships slide into formation just beyond the orbit of our outermost planet. A transmission arrives moments later, translated instantly into every language spoken on Earth, the same layered voice I remember from the tribunal chamber now carrying across an entire planet's communication networks. Humanity, the voice says, you have been given the opportunity to comply. The proposal offered by your representative has not yet been accepted. Stand down your defenses and prepare for correction. I stand in the command center, watching the fleet hold position, and I feel the entire room turn toward me, waiting to see what I will say. I do not hesitate. Tell them no, I say. Politely, but tell them no. Across the system, on the bridge of the lead Concorde vessel, though I will not learn the details until much later, Naira Thess stands quietly among a delegation sent to observe the outcome, watching a screen that shows Earth's defense grid rising to meet a fleet 3 times its size. She has spent her entire life inside the Concorde, taught from birth that the great laws existed for a reason too large and too old for any single generation to question. She has watched other species comply, watched them fold quietly the moment Concorde ships entered their skies, watched the layered voice of the tribunal declare correction complete before a single shot was ever needed. She does not expect what happens next. Earth does not fold. The first hours of the standoff are not a battle, not in the way either side expected. Concorde ships attempt to establish what they call a containment field, a technology meant to gently seal a planet's defenses without violence, the same method that has worked, uncontested, for longer than human civilization has existed. Earth's engineers, working from data gathered during my time in the tribunal chamber and cross-referenced against every scrap of alien technology humanity has ever managed to study, find the field's frequency within 6 hours and disrupt it using a jury-rigged array that, according to every proper engineering principle, should have taken weeks to design. It should not work, Grace Iwu tells me again, watching the containment field flicker and fail on the main screen. It works, I say. That is the only rule that matters today. The Concorde fleet adjusts, sending smaller craft to establish direct contact, testing Earth's outer defenses with slow, deliberate pressure, the way a hand might test a door to see if it is truly locked. Earth's pilots, flying ships that are, by any honest measure, decades behind Concorde technology, respond with tactics no Concorde officer has ever needed to consider, because no species facing them has ever refused to simply comply. Callum Bryce leads a squadron that uses the gravitational pull of Earth's moon to slingshot around a Concorde escort vessel, cutting off its retreat path using nothing but momentum and timing, a maneuver so unpredictable that the escort's automated systems, built to calculate the reasonable actions of reasonable species, fail to compensate in time. Naira Thess watches this unfold from the observer's platform aboard the lead vessel, and for the first time since she was old enough to understand the great laws, she watches a Concorde officer beside her go pale with something that is not quite fear, but is close enough to it that she recognizes the shape. "They are not supposed to do that," the officer mutters, watching the escort vessel forced into a retreat it never planned for. "No one told them that," Naira says quietly. "I do not believe they would have listened even if someone had." By the end of the second day of the standoff, the Concorde fleet has not fired a single weapon capable of lasting harm, and Earth has not surrendered a single system. Neither side has broken the fragile, tense silence that has settled over our shared patch of space, but something has shifted in the balance between them, something the ancient fleet did not anticipate when it first arrived, certain of an easy correction. I stand again in the command center, watching the two forces hold their positions, refusing to blink, and I think of the words the elder speaker spoke to me in that chamber. "Then let us see which of us is willing to prove it." A new transmission arrives, and this time, the layered voice carries something I have not heard from it before. Not the flat certainty of a verdict already decided, something closer to a question. "Human Representative Voss," the voice says, "the tribunal requests your return. Immediate correction has been reconsidered." I look around the command center at the faces watching me, exhausted, uncertain, but not one of them looking away. "Tell them I am on my way," I say, "and tell them this time I am not walking in to be judged." I take a slow breath, feeling the weight of everything that brought me to this moment settle into something steadier, something closer to purpose than fear. This time, I say, I am walking in to negotiate as an equal. The shuttle ride back to the ring station feels different this time. The same stars, the same vast structure growing larger in the window, but I sit straighter now, and I notice Priya watching me in the reflection of the glass with something that looks almost like pride. "Last time you counted the guards," she says. "What are you counting this time?" "Nothing," I say. "This time I am not walking in to survive something. I am walking in to build something." The corridor is the same, 12 guards still lining the walls, but this time they do not close in around me the way they did before. They simply watch, and I notice something new in the way they watch, a caution that was not there in our first meeting, the caution reserved for something that has already proven it cannot simply be dismissed. The tribunal doors open, and the chamber beyond is fuller than before, every tier packed with representatives who have clearly heard what happened above Earth, their attention sharper, more focused, less certain of how this meeting will unfold. The elder speaker waits at the highest tier, robes settled, still, and when it speaks, the layered voice carries none of the flat certainty it held during our first meeting. "Human representative," it says. "The Concord fleet has withdrawn to a neutral distance from your system, pending the outcome of this session." "Good," I say. "That is a reasonable place to begin." I walk to the center platform, the same spot where I once stood accused, and this time I do not wait to be given permission to speak. I return to this chamber, not as someone answering for broken laws, I say, but as someone offering to help write new ones. I believe every species in this room understood, watching what happened above my planet, that the old certainty no longer holds the way it once did. A species does not need to be ancient to refuse to kneel. It only needs something worth protecting. A murmur moves through the tiers, quieter than before, more thoughtful. I notice Naira Thess seated near the lower tier, watching me with an expression that has shifted since our first meeting. Something steadier now, something closer to hope than caution. "I am prepared to negotiate," the elder speaker says, "but I will not pretend the Concord does so from a place of full agreement. There are those in this chamber who still believe your species should have been corrected rather than accommodated." "I understand that," I say. "I am not asking every voice in this chamber to agree with us. I am asking this council to accept that agreement should never again be assumed simply because one side holds more power than the other." The armored being who mocked me in our previous meeting rises from its seat, though its posture carries less certainty than before. "You survived one confrontation," it says. "That does not make you equals to species who have endured 1,000 generations of trial." "You are right," I say, meeting its gaze without flinching. "It does not make us equals in age, or in history, or in everything your people have learned across all that time. But it does make us equals in this room, in this moment, because we have proven we will not simply comply out of fear. Equality was never about who has existed longer, it is about who refuses to be silenced." Hont. The armored being does not answer, but it does not sit down with the same dismissive certainty it carried before either. It simply lowers itself back into its seat, watching, waiting. The elder speaker studies me for a long moment before speaking again. "Then let us begin," it says. "Present what you believe the new foundation should hold." I feel the weight of the entire chamber's attention settle onto me, and I let myself breathe through it rather than against it. "First," I say, "the right of any species to defend its home, its people, and its future, without requiring the approval of a council that does not share in the danger. Defense is not defiance. It is the most basic right any living thing carries." The elder speaker inclines its head, and though it does not speak agreement outright, it does not object either. "Second," I continue, "the right to grow beyond a home system into unclaimed space, guided by responsibility toward what already exists there, but not shackled by the requirement of permission from beings who have never once needed to ask permission for their own growth." A ripple moves through the lower tiers, and I notice several representatives leaning forward now, engaged in a way they were not during our first meeting. "Third," I say, "the right to correct suffering within one's own people, through knowledge earned and responsibility accepted, rather than waiting on review that may arrive too late to matter. Nyra rises slowly from her seat, and the chamber quiets to hear her speak. "I would add a fourth," she says, her voice steadier than I remember it being in our first meeting. "The right to be heard before judgment is passed, rather than after. My people were never given the chance to explain what our sickness cost us before the old laws decided our fate. I do not wish that silence repeated for any species that comes after us." The elder speaker is quiet for a long moment, and when it finally speaks, something in its ancient voice has softened, just slightly, like stone worn smooth by patient water. "These are not small requests," it says. "They ask this council to relinquish authority that has stood unquestioned for longer than your species has existed. They ask this council to remember what it was like to be young," I say, "before comfort made caution feel like wisdom and control feel like order." The chamber is silent, and for the first time since I first walked through those massive doors, I do not feel like a specimen being observed or a defendant being weighed. I feel like someone standing among equals who have simply not yet decided to act like it. The elder speaker rises fully, robes settling with the weight of something ancient, making a choice it has not made in longer than memory serves. "This tribunal will not decide today whether every voice in this chamber accepts what you propose," it says. "But it will decide this. Humanity's proposal will be recorded as the first submission toward a new foundation, one that this council will spend the seasons ahead debating in full, with your representatives present at every stage, not as the accused, but as authors." Something in my chest loosens, a tension I did not fully realize I had been carrying since the moment that first message arrived on Earth 11 days ago. "That is all I ask," I say, "not certainty of agreement, only the chance to help shape what comes next." The elder speaker gestures, and at its command, a symbol forms in the light above the chamber, ancient banners belonging to each founding species, arranged in a slow, deliberate circle. I watch as a new space opens among them, empty, waiting. "It is tradition," the elder speaker says, "for any species accepted into the shaping of the great laws, to place its mark among the founders. I do not have a banner prepared, no ceremonial symbol brought from Earth for this moment, because I never expected to need one. But Priya's voice crackles softly through my earpiece, quiet enough that only I can hear it. "Commander," she says, "Command just transmitted something for you. They said you would know when to use it." A small data packet arrives, and when I open it, I find a simple image, one I recognize instantly. It is not a flag built for war, or a crest built for power. It is the outline of Earth itself, seen from orbit, the same image every human who has ever left the planet carries somewhere in their memory, a reminder of the only home any of us have ever known. I project the image into the waiting space among the ancient banners, and I watch it settle there, small among giants, but present all the same. The chamber is silent as the image takes its place, and I feel the weight of that silence differently than every silence before it. Not judgment, not fear, something closer to a beginning. Humanity did not come to this chamber today to ask for forgiveness, I say, my voice steady, carrying to every tier of that ancient room. We came to explain that laws written for the comfortable no longer fit a galaxy that includes the young, the untested, and the still afraid. You asked us to follow rules we never agreed to. Today, we did not simply refuse them. I look up at the circle of ancient banners, our small, quiet symbol resting among them for the first time in the history of this council. Today, we picked up the pen ourselves. The elder speaker studies the image for a long moment, and when it finally speaks, its ancient voice carries something I never expected to hear directed at me, something that, in any language across the stars, can only be understood as respect. "Then let us write," it says, "together." And for the first time since I stepped off that shuttle, afraid and uncertain and counting guards in a corridor built to remind me how small I was supposed to feel, I understand that fear was never the truest thing I carried into this chamber. What I carried was the simple, stubborn refusal of my entire species to stay small just because someone older told us to. And today, standing among ancient banners with a small, humble image of my own home floating quietly beside them, I finally let myself believe that refusal was enough.